Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. My name is Joy. I had to get on here today because I couldn't let the moment pass without calling out one of the, I was going to say most famous, but at this point infamous prosperity preachers out there who turned out like most prosperity preachers do. And I'm saying prosperity preachers on purpose. I'm adding a caveat to the word preachers. This one turned out to be a complete fraud. Carl Lentz. I remember when I first saw this guy a couple years ago hanging out with the Beebs. But I can't say I follow him. I just follow news. So I remember seeing the guy. Apparently was a pastor at Hillsong Church in New York, which is a mega church conglomerate because they have churches in at least, I think I saw it read 6 different continents. So I didn't follow Carl Lentz. I probably couldn't even pick him out of a lineup before now. But that doesn't mean he's not famous. And that doesn't mean that the discussion that we're about to have isn't warranted. It just means that I didn't fall for the con like a bunch of other folks did. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, Carl Lentz, and just the whole prosperity church, the mentality, what I mean by prosperity, that the folks that preach like, you know, it's perfectly fine to live a luxurious life and to have nice things and to be wealthy, and that God wanted that for you as long as you're good and you give and you go to church, that there's nothing wrong with having billions of dollars. That's what I mean by prosperity. That if you do good, good will come to you and you deserve good. And of course, that's true in its essence. But when we get to mega churches and private jets and Gucci, Louis, Fendi, Prada, we're talking about something completely different here. And so a lot of what I'm going to read today is from this New York Times article by Ruth Graham. She covers religion issues at the newspaper. So it goes, Carl Lentz, we're going to talk about, first came to national media in the summer of 2017 when the singer Justin Bieber abruptly canceled the remainder of a concert tour that had taken him across 6 continents in 16 months. Mr. Bieber cited fatigue and his fans fretted. But on the tabloid website TMZ, a more hopeful narrative emerged. The 23-year-old singer left the tour because he rededicated his life to Christ. Thanks to Carl Lentz, the protagonist of our story today, and leader of the New York branch of the global megachurch Hillsong. The pastor and the pop star were inseparable, and Mr. Bieber saw Mr. Lentz as a second father. That year, Hillsong and Mr. Lentz became a fixture on TMZ, always in flattering items: cars, beaches, clothes. And so around this time, this is 2017, I would say that's when I saw Lentz take off. That's what I'm saying. I remember seeing him on the news and hanging out with all these celebrities. Oprah gave her seal of approval after he was interviewed by her. He showed up on Kourtney Kardashian's Instagram, and Hillsong was like the thing. Like, if you were young and a Christian, then if you weren't into Hillsong, then you were lame. As crazy as that sounds. And I remember in doing this, I saw pictures of him with Selena Gomez. There's a ton of pictures of him with Kevin Durant. A ton of pictures with Lentz and other black celebrities, other celebrities in general, Brandon Marshall, Jay-Z, Carmelo Anthony. And over the last 3 years, 2017 to 2020, this guy has been everywhere. He's like the young Joel Osteen, or what's that guy at the Potter's House out of Dallas? I can't remember his name right now, or Houston. TD Jakes. He's the young version of that. But of course, I wouldn't be talking about this if all good things, or the appearance of good things, didn't come to an end. So it was announced just last month, November 4th, by Brian Houston, the founder of Hillsong. I told you it's not just one church in New York, it is spread out across 6 continents. He announced that Mr. Lentz, pastor du jour at the New York branch, was fired, citing leadership issues and breaches of trust, plus a recent revelation of moral failures, and sent this in an email to churchgoers. The day after the announcement, Carl Lentz went on Instagram, where this Times article says he has almost 700,000 followers. I don't use Instagram like that, so I wouldn't know, nor would I be following this guy, but he has 700,000 followers. He went on to say on the Instagram that, quote, "I was unfaithful in my marriage, the most important relationship in my life," end quote. And there's something fishy about that. Usually these pastors say Jesus is the most important relationship, or God, or the church, but that's neither here nor there. But according to Hillsong Church, it was actually more than just that one affair. Unlike what Carl Lentz tried to imply by all this. It says, "I was unfaithful in my marriage." Yeah, okay, that's pretty vague. Okay, all right. So Hillsong Church is saying it was more than one. Now, according to this New York Times article, in the private video conference with staff members and volunteers of the church's East Coast branch on November 19th, a recording of which was obtained by the paper, Mr. Houston described the church's discovery of more than one affair. And they were significant. But sexual infidelity was only one piece of the story. Mr. Houston also connected Mr. Lentz's dismissal to general narcissistic behavior, manipulating, mistreating people. Dang, so he says, quote, general narcissistic behavior, manipulating and mistreating people. So this man was the pastor of a mega church. I guess this is the result of Me Too. It's coming out now, which is crazy because, I mean, the Me Too's been around since at least since this guy has been popular. So it's funny that it's just coming to light now. So it's connected to general narcissistic behavior, manipulating, mistreating people, as well as, quote, breaches of trust connected to lying and constantly lying. Okay. So that's the gist of this. So guy who's prosperity preacher, who's all about living your best life, was living his best life. Also, if it's not clear yet, Hillsong was living its best life. And Hillsong isn't just some typical mega church like the ones I mentioned before, the Joel Osteen and T.D. Jakes. They don't have this single well-known pastor. Hillsong in itself, the name, the brand, is spread out across 6 continents. I was reading here in this article, it has this complete aesthetic. With the neutrals, the streetwear, body-conscious fashion, as you can see. With the main man himself, Carl Lentz. Apparently has a sound too, and the church's band has won a Grammy. It says the most popular song, Oceans, has been streamed more than 235 million times on Spotify. I mean, that's more than popular artists. That's more than a lot of popular artists. They just had their, Spotify had its end of year music favorites list come out. 235 million. Now, imagine that many streams, not only on servers like Spotify, but YouTube, where I can understand kind of the revenue is generated a little bit more. The most popular R&B and rap artists of this year, on their most popular song, maybe have 50 million streams. And we're talking 235 here? 6 continents, average attendance of 150,000 people weekly. Imagine how much money they're generating from the tithes, and I wonder where it's going. Article goes on to say this isn't the only side of Hillsong. So the popularity, the songs, the aesthetic, but that the New York branch of the church especially worshipped a culture of wealth while making volunteers cater to leaders as royalty. Damn. The founder of Hillsong Church, though, Brian Houston again, has came out and denied all this, saying, "I wanted to make it very clear that celebrity culture is not a core value of Hillsong Church." Well, I've heard it just the opposite. Everything I have seen has said just the opposite. If the only reason I know about your church is because of your association with celebrities, I can tell you right there that statement does not seem to be true on its surface. That it's not a core value. Now, Carl Lentz says he was raised in Virginia Beach, spent years looking for his calling. Okay. He played basketball at North Carolina State University before dropping out. He worked as a greeter at a Gucci store on Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles. But in the early 2000s, he made his way to Australia, where he attended a school operated by Hillsong Church. So I don't know if they're nitpicking what jobs he had previously, but okay, D1 basketball player, worker at the Gucci store. Seeing a pattern here? It doesn't seem to be that Mr. Lentz's life has ever been low-key. By 2010, Hillsong was opening its first church in the United States, and Mr. Lentz and his wife Laura by that time moved from Virginia to New York to help Joel Houston lead it. Joel Houston's one of the brothers in the family. Lentz goes to Australia, meets his future wife Laura. Why do I keep wanting to call her lawyer? Meets him, and then they come back to New York. They go to New York and help open Hillsong New York. So it's around this time Mr. Lentz became friends with Mr. Bieber, the young pop star. The two became so close that Mr. Bieber moved in with the Lentz family temporarily in 2014. They were photographed together often at a recording studio in Beverly Hills, a go-kart racetrack in Los Angeles, and ruffling conservative feathers in Christian circles by apparently doing shots at a bar in New Zealand. I'm serious. Like, I don't even remember, and I'll talk about this a little more later, but I went to church quite a lot as a kid growing up. And I don't think my pastor even drank real alcohol during the bread and blood part. Body of Christ. I won't call it communion because it wasn't really that, but it's sort of like that. You know, let me eat the body through the crackers and the grape juice was the blood. They didn't even have real alcohol at that point. So I can't even imagine any pastor I've ever had doing shots. The only time I've ever seen preachers drink alcohol is in movies. I know the Catholics do it, but I'm not Catholic, so I haven't seen it. So Mr. Lentz was known for his look, tattoos, edgy glasses, and not just style, but fashion. Women's Wear Daily described Mr. Lentz's uniform as a Saint Laurent leather jacket, ripped jeans, and a low-cut t-shirt. He often sported a Rolex, too. Pastors and other staff members who arrived at Hillsong wearing traditional suits and ties often gradually started to dress like Mr. Lentz and even imitate his southern-inflected accent. Okay, that's weird, honestly, that these other pastors are copying his voice and mannerisms and even the way he dresses. I guess if you want to be, I don't know, do what works, maybe. The New York church, which reported a weekly attendance of more than 7,000 people last year, soon started outposts in Montclair, New Jersey, Norwalk, Connecticut, and Boston. Those four locations became known as Hillsong East Coast, and the Lentzes were in charge of all of them. Dang, so this dude had a lot of power across the East Coast. This is like cardinal level, bishop level stuff if you were in a different religion. According to current and former congregants, Mr. Lentz was unusually remote during this time. He seemed to disappear for months at a time, appearing on stage at church only intermittently. Soon the church's cultural cachet grew outside Christian circles. I know people who came to church not because they were Christians, but because they thought Carl was hot, said Heather McClanahan, who worked for the church in 2004 to 2015. So this is way before he even became nationally famous. That's just a lot. You're going to this church because the man is hot. You're going to sit there hours on hand on a Sunday because, okay. So obviously he has a cult of personality. I'll just leave it at that. But Mr. Lentz both loomed large and was rarely present. He seemed to I read that. He seemed to disappear for months at a time, appearing on stage at church only intermittently. His Instagram showed him attending the Super Bowl in Florida and at Mr. Bieber's wedding at a South Carolina resort. So he wasn't at church, but he was globetrotting around the United States. The church seemed to go out of its way to cultivate a hierarchy of coolness. A reserved seating section for VIP appeared at the front of the church and then expanded to take up multiple rows. Miss Agata, a former volunteer, said that when high-profile entertainers or sports stars would try to slip into the main seating area, content to worship with ordinary churchgoers, ushers were often instructed to guide them to the special section in front, or to whisk them backstage to meet Mr. Lentz. The staff built this culture and made them a big deal, Miss Agata said. A lot of us felt torn because it doesn't feel like something Jesus would do. Yeah, what would Jesus do? Yeah, I gotta agree. Congregants also described a distinct caste system at the church that corresponded to appearance, wealth, and fame. Quote, if you're a pastor, you're more important than everyone else, said Josh Canfield, who used to attend the church and sang with the local church's worship band. Quote, if you're a celebrity, you're more important. If you've done something to make you famous, or if you're rich, you're more important, end quote. Mr. Lentz's dismissal happened quickly. On October 22nd, a staff member at the church in Manhattan found intimate text messages on Mr. Lentz's work computer. Ronan Karim, a jewelry designer in Brooklyn, told the Times that she had been in a relationship with Mr. Lentz since May, and that Mr. Lentz called her in late October to tell her their messages had been discovered. A week and a half after the messages were found, he was fired. Okay. This is coming from Page 6 now. According to one insider, in July 2017, a Hillsong member wrote to one of the church's directors an email with allegations that some Hillsong leaders were texting nude photos to female volunteers, and that Lentz had been accused of making one volunteer, quote, extremely uncomfortable, end quote, after he, quote, acted inappropriately, was extremely flirtatious, and had been involved in inappropriate sexual behavior with different women, end quote. So this is 2017. So I wonder if this is right after he's blown up or right before. Because, again, I told y'all he came to prominence nationally in 2017. This is 2017. In November of this year, a staff member found a very compromising chain of text messages on Carl's laptop. We drove right across town to talk to Carl and confront him, and that was the beginning of the process we are at now, staffer said. So this is what I mentioned earlier briefly. New York City-based designer Ronan Karim, 34, alleged to the Post that she had a months-long relationship with a married pastor and father of 3. I had not brought that up yet, but he is married. His wife, Laura, got it now, and is a father of 3. Of course, I'm not going to show the kids, and I hope they don't know what's happening. And it started last summer claiming he was like a drug to her. But the thing with Hillsong is this isn't, everything that's happening is not just on Carl Lentz. And this isn't Brian Houston, Hillsong's founder. This isn't his first run-in with scandal. In 2015, that he failed, an Australian commission found that he failed to inform the police about child sexual abuse accusations against his own father, who was another prominent pastor in Australia. It says Mr. Houston's father was accused in the late 1990s of sexually abusing a young boy decades earlier. Mr. Houston pressed his father, who has since died, into retirement when he found out. So instead of actually informing this police, seeking justice for the victims and the state, Houston kept it quiet, let his father retire, pushed him out, and didn't do anything else. It says after he was fired, this is talking about Carl now, recently, after he was fired, the Lentzes sold their home in Montclair in October. Mrs. Lentz resigned from her position at the church. I heard she was fired. She was pushed out. Doesn't sound like she's done anything wrong in the situation, so I'm not sure why. The couple and their 3 children have since decamped to Southern California. Again, I don't know what that means. Decamp, move. I guess it just means moved. Paparazzi have photographed Mr. Lentz riding his bicycle, taking an evening stroll with his family, and meditating shirtless on the beach. You would think at this point he would keep his clothes on. So after reading this and just thinking about how this church propped up a life of decadence and celebrity, why is it that we're still letting preachers like this exist, prosper, become national? What are we? Is it hypnotism? Is it blind faith? And not only do they get propped up, but they get to slink away quietly and decamp, whatever that means. Based on everything I've learned about Carl Lentz in this short time, it wasn't even that he succumbed to temptation, that he somehow, this church sucked him in, and it became this cesspool of debauchery. He sought this from the start. It wasn't the church that sucked him in. It was he who sucked in the church with his cool guy attitude. He wanted to achieve celebrity from the start, and that's what he did. And not only is he famous, but he might be what we call infamous. Not only that, but Brian Houston himself has shown that he is completely morally bankrupt in any of this. And that's what we're really getting at here. He failed to report his pedophile of a father to police, and he failed to do anything about years, at least, of behavior. Predatory behavior. Unchristian-like behavior, if I do say so myself. As someone who grew up going to church multiple times per week, I feel like I can speak on this with some kind of perspective. And I have a lot of questions ruminating in my mind. First, why is there a caste system in this church, at Hillsong, in any church? Why do rich celebrities have VIP status? Why are pastors preying on churchgoers? You can't pay staff. You can't have, I read this church doesn't have members. That if you want to be more involved with the church, you don't become members. You volunteer. That's what you do. Why aren't you paying your staff instead of forcing, I won't say vulnerable, but people who are committed to the faith, who want to do good by the church, may not be able to afford to tithe, but can come in and volunteer? Why are you taking advantage of those people? Preying on churchgoers when you should be servants, not only to the people, but to the scripture. I see that all too often. Pastors are propped up, elders are propped up, prominent people in the church are propped up, famous people are propped up, and especially if they've been there any amount of time, they get to become these upper caste of the church, largely reinforcing the same social stratifications that people go to the church, flee to the church to get away from in society. Another thing, I saw this growing up, and more so now. I won't say I saw it growing up in my own personal church that I went to, but saw it in religion as a whole and see it more so now, is people like Kenneth Copeland and Joyce Meyer. Church leaders who want to shape the church to their beliefs instead of the other way around. They pick and choose passages from the Bible, and they twist and bend them to fit what they want the scriptures to mean and say. I don't want to go to church and hear Republicans can't be saved. I also don't want to go to church and hear that liberals are doomed to hell. And if that's happening, which we know is a violation of tax exempt status, then why do these churches still have tax exempt status when they're preaching politics? Preach morality. Preach what's good, because that's what's missing in Congress, in the Senate, in the White House, from either party. Saying that one part I was reading about is that they don't do members. If you want to be more involved, you got to volunteer. Some of the volunteer work included cleaning up. The volunteers cleaning up after exclusive VIP church parties that the volunteers weren't even invited to. So I'm thinking, with all of the money Hillsong brought in, they couldn't even pay staff to clean up after themselves. They had to have volunteers come in and clean up after folks who were multimillionaires, multiple properties across states. The other issue with these churches like Hillsong and folks like Carl Lentz is that they're more focused on entertaining than preaching. More worried about who is in the audience and what they're wearing than if the church is actually a place where you go to pray or a place where you go to play. Are you praying at church or are you playing at church? Because if you're playing, why do you get to do it tax-free? Making millions of dollars. Pastors showing up wearing Saint Laurent and hanging out at the Super Bowl, but paying no taxes the whole time. If they weren't so focused on taking in money and income and revenue, how could they even become mega churches? If they weren't chasing that dollar, how did they even become mega churches? It's because people are still confusing wealth, fame, glamour, good looks with spiritual purity, morality. I remember, again, growing up, it's come as you are. That's what I heard from church leaders. Come as you are. How does the average churchgoer in America come as they are when the pastor at the pulpit is in Gucci and gold? Another bad part about this is that Carl Lentz being able to terrorize, being allowed to terrorize, abuse. I think it's sort of a spiritual abuse when you stand up here and say, I'm this, that, and the other, and you can be this, that, and the other. If only you do as I instruct. That's cultish. I saw one comment that gets at this, like we just prop any and everybody up. Carl Lentz is one of them. It said that, like, what it says, quote, what struck me as I read this article is that Lentz appears to have no credentials whatsoever. Not only does he not have a divinity degree, he seems to have no formal theological training at all. He took a few unrelated college courses and dropped out. I'm sick of the media failing to differentiate self-appointed fakers and hustlers from professionally qualified preachers who have earned their standing, end quote. This isn't new, though. America keeps doing this. It's the culture we're in. When everyone who has a Twitter or Facebook, an audience of millions, you can be an average person and have an audience of millions. When anybody can upload a video on YouTube, yeah, I know, yes, I get it. That's exactly what I did. But when anybody can upload a video on YouTube, we're bound to get a lot of false prophets. Kanye West comes to mind. He's not even a preacher. Only thing I ask folks is after all this, after the dang near 30 minutes I've been talking now, this is all I ask. I'm not asking you to abandon faith. I'm not asking you to change what you believe in, who you believe in, or to, cast Christianity to the side because it can't work. But I'm just asking, can we leave the Kenneth Copelands, the Carl Lentzes, the Eddie Longs, the Jerry Falwells Juniors? Can we leave them in 2020? Leave them in 2020 with the coronavirus? Because trust me, their story, the story they're telling you, never ends like you think it will. It never does. But anyhow, that's what I got. Don't forget to comment below, especially if you've ever watched, listened to, been to a Hillsong sermon. Tell me what you think. Because Carl Lentz was spending more time picking outfits to wear than picking scriptures to share. And I want to know what you think about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe while you're at it. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.